Army Colonel Donovan Phillips.
Board President O'Hara, Post Commander Simarusti, Pastor Jamie Morrison, distinguished guests, veterans, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your warm welcome and for the opportunity to speak to you this morning. To the Marines of Air Control Group 48, you look great this morning. The Boy Scouts of Troop 42 did a fabulous job. Thank you for your service. To the Lake Forest High School Band and to Will, the soloist, you sound great this morning. And to Megan, who reminded us this morning of the frailty and fragility of freedom and liberty with her rendition of the Gettysburg Address. Thank you as well. And thank you to all for your participation in this morning's ceremony. On Monday, the 11th of November, 1918, at 11 o'clock in the morning, an armistice signed in Compiègne, France, took effect, concluding for all practical purposes the war to end all wars. This optimistic moniker has sadly not been realized in the 97 years that have followed. But even in the midst of continuing conflict and the threat of conflict throughout the world, it is entirely fitting that we pause, if only for a moment, to reflect on that historic day of peace and to honor veterans of this and all conflicts waged by the United States. St. Augustine declared that the purpose of all wars is peace, and no one cherishes peace more than the sailor, the soldier, the airman, or the Marine who has seen the worst inhumanity of war. But our service members and veterans have proven time and again that they are willing to forego peace and personal safety for a higher calling, that of liberty and freedom. In his inaugural address in January 1961, President Kennedy described this calling. Let every nation know, whether it wishes us well or ill, that we shall pay any price, bear any burden, meet any hardship, support any friend, oppose any foe, to assure the survival and the success of liberty. This, of course, being that same liberty put to the test, in the words of Lincoln, nearly 100 years prior. Kennedy continued, in the long history of the world, only a few generations have been granted the role of defending freedom in its hour of maximum need. The energy, the faith, the devotion which we bring to this endeavor will light our country and all who serve it, and the glow from that fire can truly light the world. Veterans here with us today, who we honor today, you are the generation he was referring to, willing to defend freedom in its hour of maximum need. A young Winston Churchill, commanding Commonwealth forces on the Western Front in World War I, was much more terse in his assessment of this calling. It is no use saying, we are doing our best, he said. You have got to succeed in doing what is necessary. This is the call that has always been answered by the selfless servants we call our veterans, doing what is necessary. From frost-bitten Valley Forge to the harrowing fields of Gettysburg and Antietam, from the trenches of Saint-Mihiel and the Argonne to Pearl Harbor, Normandy, Corregidor, and Bastogne, from the precarious tollroad in Pusan and the cliffs at Incheon to Nha Trang, Khe Sanh, and Saigon, from Kuwait City and Basra to Tora Bora, Baghdad, Fallujah, and Kandahar. Selfless veterans, always offering and often giving the last full measure of devotion, have refused to allow this light of freedom and liberty that Kennedy spoke of, the light of freedom from tyranny, to be extinguished. Freedom and liberty have flourished in their wake. Government of, by, and for the people has not perished from the earth. But make no mistake, the continued vitality of this nation conceived in liberty is not a foregone conclusion. Today's veterans have passed the baton to the next generation. It is up to us to never permit the light of freedom to be snuffed out, regardless of the cost. So what do we say then in response to such devotion, such sacrifice? What debt do we owe our veterans? First, I would say we owe them gratitude. About a month ago, I was waiting for a train at the Pentagon Metro station in Washington, D.C. in uniform. It was rush hour and the station was quite crowded. Nearby, a man in a wheelchair sought to catch my attention. He wanted to express his thanks for my service. As we chatted, I realized he was wearing a cap indicating he had served in Vietnam. He told me of the 2 Purple Hearts he had earned. And then I asked him about the nature of the homecoming he received upon completion of his tour, suspecting what the answer would be. This encounter gave me a chance to express my thanks to him for enduring the scorn of a nation that had not yet learned to separate its view of policy from those who found themselves in the position of dutifully carrying out that policy. Because in a very direct way, his experience led to the type of homecoming I received every time I returned from an overseas deployment. In the quarter century between his return from Vietnam and mine from Desert Storm, the nation had learned to make this distinction. In a very real way, he and all Vietnam veterans wrote a check that I and my generation were blessed with the privilege of cashing. We owe our thanks to all veterans, to be sure, but I believe we owe a very special debt of gratitude to those of the Vietnam generation. Second, we owe our veterans a debt of honor for their sacrifice and selfless service. It comes as no surprise that veterans continue to serve after they've taken off the uniform. And we have many great examples of such service here with us today. The men and women of American Legion Post 510 have given of themselves to serve the community of Lake Bluff and have done so for many years. They deserve our heartfelt thanks. So how do we honor the sacrifice and selfless service of our veterans? By following their example. Get involved. Serve the community, the church, your school. Volunteer at the VA hospital just up the street. Offer your time and resources to organizations that support veterans and their families. Follow the lead of our veterans by giving of yourself for the good of those around you. Finally, we owe it to our veterans to remember the fallen and give meaning to their sacrifice. In a few minutes, you will hear the names of local men and women who have given their lives in the line of duty. Listen to their names. Know that attached to each is a family, a mother, a father, a wife, a husband, a son, a daughter, who would have loved nothing more than to see them return home from conflict alive and safe. That they did not is part of the heavy price of freedom. We demonstrate our remembrance in many ways, one of which is by honoring the final resting places of the fallen. In the small village of Margraten, in the very southern tip of the Netherlands, not far from Bastogne and Malmedy in Belgium, lies an American cemetery holding 8,301 Americans killed in World War II, many of whom died during the liberation of the Netherlands and the subsequent Battle of the Bulge, Nazi Germany's last gasp attempt to break the momentum of the Allies in December and January 1944 and 45. Every single grave in this cemetery has been adopted by a local Dutch family. The duties of adoption include visiting and maintaining the gravesite, as well as commemorating the American holidays of Memorial Day and Veterans Day with flowers and flags. Most adoptive families go above and beyond, finding surviving family members in the U.S., corresponding with them, and sharing photos, painstakingly researching the circumstances of the death of each service member, and answering questions of the surviving family. Many adoptive families have hosted in their homes the surviving family members wishing to visit the burial site of their loved one. Most of all, though, these adoptive families remember. They understand what it means to live under the occupation of an oppressive regime, and they wish to express their gratitude to those who had a hand in securing their freedom. More impressive is the extent to which this gratitude has been passed on to the younger generation. Amazingly, a large percentage of the graves are now adopted by individuals and families born since World War II. There is even a waiting list to adopt a grave. The average time spent on this wait list is not measured in weeks or even months or years, but in generations. I think we have some things to learn from our Dutch friends. I was personally humbled by the desire of those I met to remember and express gratitude. And I was very proud of the role the U.S. played in liberating this part of Europe more than 70 years ago. So how do we give meaning to the sacrifices of the fallen? How do we ensure they have not died in vain? By how we live our lives. Veterans and service members have all taken a vow to defend the Constitution. But every citizen is a caretaker, a steward of the ideals expressed in this document. Renew your commitment to the duties of citizenship, debating, discussing, disagreeing, while finding common ground. Pass these duties on to your children and your grandchildren. Do your part to ensure that the ideals of this nation, conceived in liberty, will stand any test, and that government of, by, and for the people will not perish from the earth. Every one of us has a hand in this. So on this Veterans Day, with the thanks of a grateful nation, we honor veterans and we honor their families. We acknowledge their sacrifice and devotion to duty, honor, and country. And we reflect on our own duty in the wake of such sacrifice. May God bless and keep all the veterans and their families, and may He continue to bless this great nation. Thank you.